My name's Ethan, and if you told me 6 years ago that I'd be here, spilling my guts to a group of strangers online, I would have laughed in your face. Back then, life felt straightforward. I was head over heels in love, married to the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, and my biggest concern was deciding what to make for dinner. But life, as it turns out, has a way of flipping the script when you least expect it. To understand how I got here, we need to go back to the very beginning, college. That's where I met Madison, as she liked to be called. She was the kind of woman who instantly caught everyone's attention. Tall, self-assured, and armed with a smile so bright it could light up a stadium. While most of us were stumbling around, cluelessly trying to figure out our class schedules, Madison was already commanding the room like she belonged on a stage. And me? I was just a nervous guy trying not to dump coffee all over my orientation packet. We officially crossed paths at a campus coffee shop. She bumped into me while reaching for a napkin, though she confessed years later that the whole thing was staged. One conversation led to another, and before I knew it, we were deep in a discussion about everything: music, dreams, and all the wild things we hoped to do in life. She wanted to become a fashion influencer, jet-setting across the globe in designer outfits. I thought it was a little far-fetched, but her enthusiasm was magnetic. Fast forward a few years, and we were married. Our wedding was like a scene pulled straight off Pinterest: glowing fairy lights, mason jars with cute handwritten name cards, and Madison looking like a goddess in her lace gown. I was convinced I'd hit the jackpot. At the time, I couldn't have imagined that this dream would slowly unravel into a nightmare. For the first few years, everything was golden. Madison threw herself into growing her Instagram following, while I focused on building my career as a software engineer. She'd spend hours brainstorming photo shoots, editing pictures, and connecting with other influencers. When she landed her first big brand deal, I couldn't have been prouder. It felt like we'd hit the big leagues. But the thing about social media success that no one tells you? It's a double-edged sword. As her follower count exploded, so did her ego. Suddenly, everything in our lives revolved around the brand. Her brand. Date nights turned into production meetings. Vacations? Forget relaxing. They became elaborate photo shoots complete with sunsets and overpriced cocktails. And if I ever suggested we put the phone down and just enjoy the moment, that was met with an eye roll and a reminder about engagement metrics. I tried to convince myself it was just a phase, part of the grind to achieve her dream. But deep down, I could feel the cracks beginning to spread. The woman I fell in love with, the one who laughed at my corny jokes and devoured instant ramen with me during finals week, was disappearing, replaced by someone consumed with likes and filters. Then came the gym. At first, I cheered her on. Staying healthy? Good for her, I thought. But her workout routine quickly morphed into something more intense. Soon, she had a new crew, a clique of young, single gym buddies who lived for late-night bar crawls and clubbing. They called themselves the Fit Queens. I called them Trouble. That's when things really started to fall apart. She'd stroll in late at night, reeking of tequila and cheap perfume, laughing at something on her phone that I wasn't in on. Just girls' night, she'd say with a dismissive wave, as if I were some overly strict parent interrogating her. Maybe I should have pushed back harder, asked more questions, but I didn't. I wanted to trust her. I wanted to believe that we were still the team we used to be. Turns out, I was fooling myself. Here's the thing about me. I'm not one to brag, but I've done all right for myself. After college, I scored a solid job as a software engineer. By the time Madison hit her stride with her influencer career, I was already climbing the corporate ladder, earning 6 figures, and putting money away for the future. Stability, that was my thing. While Madison fantasized about designer bags and luxury getaways, I was focused on making sure we never have to worry about paying bills or handling an emergency. I guess that's where we were different. Success didn't change me. I was still the same guy who thought an extra-large pizza and a Netflix binge made for a perfect Friday night. But for Madison, every dollar she earned wasn't just income. It was fuel for the next big show. And trust me, there was always a bigger show. As Madison's life became more glamorous and over the top, mine stayed rooted in reality. I'd spend my days grinding through long hours at work, only to come home and find her laughing on a live stream, chatting about the latest skincare hack or unboxing another shipment of free designer gear. At first, I was genuinely happy for her. Watching her succeed felt good. Who wouldn't be proud of their spouse? But then it all started to feel excessive. Let me paint you a picture. One night, after a brutal 12-hour shift fixing bugs that weren't even mine to begin with, I walked through the door and found our living room completely taken over. It looked like a chaotic photo studio, tripods, ring lights, and clothes scattered everywhere. Half a dozen outfits were strewn across the floor, and Madison was glued to her phone, scrolling through something with laser focus. "Hey babe, can you help me with this lighting?" she called out without even glancing up. I dropped my bag, biting back the words bubbling up inside me. "Sure," I said, forcing a smile. But what I really wanted to say was, "Can we please just have a normal dinner for once?" That was the moment it hit me. We weren't just drifting apart, we were living in two completely different worlds. My world revolved around spreadsheets and deadlines. Hers was all about hashtags and endless DMs. Somewhere along the line, we stopped meeting in the middle. And let me tell you, the gym didn't make things any better. Madison's new Fit Queen crew started taking up more and more of her time. It started innocently enough, workouts and smoothies after class. Then came brunches. Then nights out that somehow stretched into early mornings. And the stories she'd bring home? They didn't exactly put me at ease. "Oh my God, Ethan, you should have seen the bartender last night. Total eye candy," she'd gush, oblivious to how her words landed. "Sounds fun," I'd reply with a forced smile, but inside, I was screaming. Seriously, who talks like that to their husband? Then came the phone call. It was late, probably around midnight. I was in the bedroom, mindlessly scrolling through work emails, while Madison was in the living room. Her voice carried easily through the thin walls, and I wasn't trying to listen in. But when someone says, "You're just so much fun to talk to," it's hard not to pay attention. I froze, my stomach knotting as I strained to catch the rest. "Yeah, he's fine. Just, boring sometimes. But enough about him. What are you doing tomorrow?" Her tone was light, playful, and far too familiar. Boring. That word slammed into me like a freight train. She was talking about me, wasn't she? The guy who worked his tail off to make sure she could chase her dreams without worrying about rent, bills, or groceries. The guy who still showed up with surprise flowers or planned date nights, even when she was too busy to care. I sat there, fists clenched so tight my nails left marks in my palms. Part of me wanted to storm into the living room and demand an explanation, but the other part, the logical, calculated part, knew better. If my gut was right, I'd need proof before I confronted her. That's when I made the decision to check her phone. I'm not proud of it. I felt like a criminal sneaking around in our bedroom that night. Madison had gone into the shower, leaving her phone on the nightstand. My heart was pounding as I reached for it, unsure of what I'd even find, or if I'd find anything at all. Deep down, I was hoping I wouldn't. But my gut told me otherwise. Unlocking her phone was surprisingly easy. Madison wasn't exactly a tech whiz, and her passcode hadn't changed in years. The screen lit up, and for a moment, guilt stabbed at me. This was her private space, her personal life. But then I reminded myself that she'd already shattered the trust between us. I wasn't invading her privacy. I was uncovering the truth. I went straight to her messages. My stomach twisted when I saw a group chat titled Fit Queens Unite. With a deep breath, I opened it. The messages were explicit, to put it mildly. A flurry of emojis, late-night plans, and inside jokes filled the chat. But then one message stopped me cold. It was from Madison, sent earlier that night. "Honestly, he has no idea. I'm too beautiful to be tied down like this. I deserve to have fun, and if that means a few harmless nights, so be it." My hands were shaking as I kept scrolling through the messages. Attention. I missed out on my whole phase, and it's time to fix that. There were laughing emojis scattered throughout the chat, followed by more texts from her gym friends hyping her up. One even wrote, "Girl, if he's boring, why not upgrade? You're a total catch." I felt a wave of rage hit me. My blood was boiling, but at the same time, I felt hollow, completely numb. It wasn't just the betrayal of her cheating, though that alone was devastating. It was the way she talked about me, like I was nothing more than a hurdle in her life, holding her back from some twisted version of fun. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the screen, reading and rereading those messages. At some point, I snapped back to reality and started taking screenshots. I didn't know exactly what I'd do with them yet, but I knew I'd need them. Then I found him. Buried in her chat history was a conversation with someone named Luke. My stomach churned as I clicked it open, and what I saw was worse than anything I could have imagined. Flirty messages. Inside jokes. Plans to meet up. And then, pictures. They weren't explicit, but they didn't need to be. It was crystal clear. This wasn't some innocent friendship. I felt physically sick. My hands were trembling so badly that I almost dropped the phone. How could she do this? After everything we'd been through, after all the sacrifices I'd made to help her chase her dreams, this was how she repaid me? By sneaking around with some guy who probably couldn't even spell commitment if you spotted him the first 8 letters. That's when I heard her footsteps. Panicking, I quickly locked her phone and placed it back on the nightstand, grabbing my own phone and pretending to scroll like nothing had happened. She walked into the room, humming a tune like she didn't have a care in the world, and climbed into bed without a second glance. "Good night," she said casually, reaching over to switch off her lamp. I didn't reply. I couldn't. My head was spinning, my chest felt like it was caving in, and I didn't trust myself to speak without everything spilling out right then and there. The next morning felt surreal, like I'd woken up in some kind of twisted alternate reality. Madison was acting as if nothing was wrong, bright, bubbly, humming along to some generic pop song while blending her morning smoothie. But every time she smiled at me with that perfect, practiced grin, all I could see were those texts. The betrayal. The mockery. I avoided her gaze, my stomach churning every time she spoke. I buried myself in work that day, though I couldn't focus on anything. My mind was stuck on a loop, replaying those messages and imagining every conversation I'd read between her and Luke. I knew I couldn't let this sit forever. I had to confront her. But I also knew it had to be on my terms, when I was ready and had thought everything through. So I waited. That evening, she came home later than usual. The stench of tequila and that overly sweet vanilla perfume she loved hit me the second she walked through the door. Her cheeks were flushed, her laugh louder than usual, and her steps a little uneven. "Had fun with the girls?" I asked, keeping my voice as even as I could. "Oh, totally," she said, dropping her bag on the counter like she hadn't just spent the evening lying to my face. "We just hit up a couple of bars, nothing crazy." I nodded, biting my tongue. Every fiber of my being wanted to scream Luke's name and demand answers. But I held it in, knowing this wasn't the moment. Instead, I waited until she disappeared into the bathroom. That's when I noticed her phone buzzing on the counter. A notification lit up her phone screen. It was a message from Luke. "Miss me yet?" My chest tightened, and something inside me snapped like a rubber band stretched too far. Before I could think it through, I snatched her phone, opened the chat, and started typing. "Hey Luke," I wrote, my fingers flying across the screen. "Just so you know, I've been hitting 250 on the bench lately, and I'm considering testing it out on your skull next." I paused for a moment, letting a bitter grin spread across my face. This was oddly satisfying, like letting out a scream after holding it in for hours. I added another message. "And if sneaking around with another guy's wife makes you feel like a man, let me clue you in, you're not. You're just a protein shake with legs." I hit send without hesitation. The reply came almost instantly. "Whoa, Madison? Nope. I shot back. Just her boring husband. You know, the guy footing the bills while you play Jimbro Casanova. I was just warming up, already typing my next response, when the creak of the bathroom door snapped me out of my focus. What the hell are you doing? Madison's voice sliced through the air, sharp and furious. I froze for half a beat before slowly turning toward her, my thumb still hovering over the keyboard. She stood there in the doorway, hair damp and clinging to her shoulders, gripping a towel like it was a lifeline. Her expression was a mix of shock, anger, and something that might have been fear, but all her attention was locked on the phone in my hand. Well, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm as I faced her. Look who's decided to join the party. Care to explain why your gym buddy thinks it's okay to send messages like this? Her face drained of color, the bravado slipping just for a moment. Give me my phone, Ethan, she demanded, stepping forward. Oh, I don't think so, I replied, holding the phone just out of reach. Luke and I are having a lovely conversation. Did you know he called you fire emoji hot? Real sweet, huh? She lunged for the phone, but I stepped back, my tone hardening as my voice rose. Don't even try it, Madison. You don't get to play the victim here. How dare you go through my messages? She snapped, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and desperation. That's such an invasion of privacy. I let out a bitter laugh that sounded almost foreign to my own ears. Privacy? I shot back. You're seriously worried about privacy when you've been sneaking around behind my back? Spare me the righteous act, Madison. Her jaw tightened, and for a second, it looked like she was about to argue. But before she could say anything, I held up the phone again and scrolled to another message. Oh, this one's a classic, I said mockingly, reading aloud. Miss me yet? You looked so good in that black dress last night. Real charmer, isn't he? Her face turned crimson, the shame and guilt unmistakable, but she tried to mask it with tears. Ethan, please, she whispered, her voice cracking. Let me explain. Explain what? I snapped, my anger boiling over. That you've been lying to me? That you think you're too beautiful to bother being faithful? Or that I'm just some boring meal ticket funding your influencer fantasy? Tears spilled down her cheeks, but I couldn't find it in me to care. You don't understand, she stammered, her voice shaking. No. I cut her off, my tone cold and final. I understand perfectly. You're selfish, Madison. You care more about likes, followers, and your phony gym queen image than you ever cared about me, the guy who stood by you for 6 years. She didn't respond. She just stood there, silent, as I tossed her phone onto the couch like it was something dirty. Pack your things, I said, my voice flat and emotionless. You're leaving tonight. Ethan, please, she sobbed, stepping closer. It was a mistake. I can fix this. I'll fix everything, I promise. No, Madison, I replied, my voice as unyielding as steel. You don't get to fix this. You don't get to rewrite the rules just because you're sorry you got caught. We're done. Without another word, I turned on my heel and went to the bedroom. Grabbing a suitcase, I began tossing her things into it with mechanical precision. She trailed behind me, crying and pleading, but her words barely registered. I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. She'd already done enough damage. When I finished packing her suitcase, I called an Uber and handed it to her without meeting her eyes. You can stay at your mom's, I said in a tone as flat as I could manage. I'll send the rest of your stuff over later. She stood there in the doorway, tears streaming down her face, her sobs breaking the heavy silence of the room. Ethan, I love you, she choked out, her voice trembling. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I quietly closed the door behind her, shutting out her words and the life we'd built together. The night after Madison left felt unreal, like I was walking through someone else's life. The house was unnervingly quiet, no blinding ring lights littering the living room, no impromptu TikTok routines disrupting the kitchen. For the first time in years, the space was mine and mine alone. But instead of feeling liberated, I felt hollow, like something had been scooped out of me and tossed aside. Still, I wasn't about to let that emptiness take over. If there's one thing you should know about me, it's that I don't break under pressure. Madison might have destroyed my trust and crushed my heart, but I still had my dignity, and I'd be damned if I let her take the rest of my life with her. The next morning, I picked up the phone and made 2 calls, one to a lawyer and the other to my best friend, Jake. When I finished explaining everything, Jake practically spat out his coffee. "Wait, you kicked her out? Just like that?" "You're damn right I did," I said, pacing back and forth across the living room floor. What was I supposed to do? Sit here, act clueless, and let her keep flirting with some gym clown while I fund her lifestyle? Jake let out a long, low whistle. Man, I always knew she had an ego, but this takes the cake. Yeah, tell me about it, I muttered, the frustration simmering just below the surface. And the worst part? She's not even sorry for what she did, she's just sorry she got caught. Jake sighed heavily. Well, if you need help hauling the rest of her stuff out, just say the word. Or, if you want me to slash Luke's tires, I've got you. For the first time in days, a laugh slipped out of me, rough around the edges but real. I'll keep that in mind, buddy. The conversation with the lawyer was a lot less lighthearted. He didn't mince words about how complicated things could get. Apparently, kicking Madison out wasn't the end of the story. She had rights, and if I wasn't careful, she could make a play for a significant chunk of my savings. Do you have any evidence of her infidelity? The lawyer asked, his voice calm but firm. Plenty, I replied, my mind flashing to the screenshots I'd taken of her conversations. Text messages, group chats, you name it. Good, he said. That's going to help, but we need to approach this strategically. If she's as self-absorbed as you say, she'll probably try to twist the narrative and paint herself as the victim. I groaned, rubbing my temples. Of course she will. She's already a pro at putting on a show. Then we'll stay ahead of her, he assured me. I'll start drafting the paperwork. In the meantime, avoid any direct communication with her. Don't respond to her calls or messages, no matter what she says or does. It'll only complicate things. Easier said than done, I muttered under my breath, the weight of his advice sinking in. In the days that followed, Madison's mood swung from desperate apologies to outright hostility. She bombarded me with calls, leaving voicemail after voicemail, crying about how much she regretted everything and begging for a chance to fix things. But when I didn't respond, her tone quickly changed. You think you're so perfect, Ethan? One voicemail began. Newsflash, you're not. Maybe if you weren't so boring, I wouldn't have needed attention from someone else. By the end of the week, she'd taken her drama to social media, naturally. Her Instagram was flooded with vague, cryptic posts. Sunset pictures paired with captions like, when love turns to control, it's time to set yourself free. And don't get me started on her stories. They were filled with sad love songs, pictures of half-empty wine glasses, and passive-aggressive complaints about how some people just don't know how to appreciate a strong woman. At first, I brushed it off. But then, one of my coworkers sent me a screenshot of a post that nearly made me choke on my coffee. It was a selfie of Madison, tears in her eyes, one hand clutching her chest like she'd just been stabbed. The caption read, betrayed, abandoned, and left to rebuild. But a queen always rises. Independent woman. New beginnings. The comments were a mix of pity and doubt. While some people bought into her sob story, others were starting to catch on. One comment caught my eye. Wait, didn't you cheat on him? That's when I realized I had the advantage. Madison had spent years building her life around her public image, and right now, that image was falling apart. A week later, the divorce papers were finally served. I would have loved to see her reaction, but I had Jake drop them off at her mom's place for me. According to him, she didn't take it well. She was losing it. Jake told me over drinks that night. Full-on meltdown mode. I swear I could hear her screaming through the door. Good, I said, taking a long sip of my beer. She deserves to feel what it's like to lose control for once. Don't get too comfortable, Jake warned. She's not the type to go down without a fight. And he was right. The very next day, I got an email from her lawyer demanding half of everything: the house, my savings, even my car. It was almost laughable. Madison had spent years preaching about her independence, yet now she was acting like she couldn't survive without a piece of my paycheck. My lawyer didn't bat an eye. "Let her shoot for the stars," he said. "She won't reach them, not with the evidence we've got." And with that, the battle was on. If there's one thing you could always count on with Madison, it's that she never knew when to back down. While I was methodically piecing together my case with my lawyer, she was out there doing what she did best: oversharing. Every post, every story, and every passive-aggressive jab at me felt like watching someone strike a match in a room full of gasoline. Her social media spiral was a strange mix of sad and, truth be told, a bit amusing. She'd throw out cryptic, melodramatic captions like, "Rebuilding after betrayal is the toughest journey, but I'll come back stronger." Or, "Some people only love you when they can control you. Know your worth, ladies." It was Madison at her finest, her victim complex cranked up to the max. But then she messed up, big time. It started with a live stream. One night, I was scrolling through Instagram when I saw she was live. Curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked. There she was, sitting on her couch with a glass of wine in hand, her cheeks a little too red, and her words slightly slurred. "You know," she began, tossing her hair like she was on stage, "people think they know me. They think they know my story. But let me tell you, they don't." I winced. Watching it felt like witnessing a slow-motion train wreck. "My ex, well, soon-to-be ex," she went on, swirling her wine like she was auditioning for a soap opera. "He's just so dull. Sure, he's a decent provider or whatever, but where's the excitement? Where's the spark? I deserve someone who makes me feel alive, you know?" The comment section was going wild. Some of her fans were eating it up, flooding the screen with hearts and fire emojis. But not everyone was on her side. A few weren't shy about calling her out. "Wasn't he the one paying all your bills?" one asked. "Didn't you cheat on him, though? Maybe focus on yourself instead of dragging him." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then she said something that flipped a switch in me. "Honestly," she slurred, "if I'd known he was going to act like this, I wouldn't have even bothered sneaking around. Like, yeah, I messed up, but who hasn't? He just couldn't handle a woman like me." That was the breaking point. I closed the app and immediately called my lawyer. By the next morning, her live stream was added to the growing stack of evidence. Between the screenshots, the text messages, and now her own public confession, we had everything we needed to show exactly who Madison really was. My lawyer reassured me that her antics were doing nothing but strengthening our case. But, as always, Madison wasn't done stirring the pot. A couple of days later, my phone buzzed with a frantic text from Jake. "Dude, have you seen her latest post?" Curious, I opened Instagram and nearly spit out my coffee. There it was, a photo of Madison standing in front of the gym, captioned with her usual blend of self-pity and denial. "They say you don't know what you have until it's gone, but sometimes what you lose wasn't worth keeping. Starting fresh, leaving the toxicity behind, and focusing on me." It wasn't the caption that floored me, it was the comments underneath. "Wait, didn't she cheat on her husband? Is this the same guy who bought her a car? Toxic? Girl, you're the toxic one." Her followers were turning against her. The carefully crafted image she'd spent years projecting was crumbling, and the irony was, she was the one holding the sledgehammer. By the time we got to court, Madison was a shadow of her former self. The unshakable confidence she'd once flaunted had crumbled under the pressure of public humiliation and financial stress. She'd lost a few sponsorships thanks to her overexposure, and her lawyer's arguments were becoming increasingly desperate. The judge wasn't buying any of it. Between the live stream, the damning screenshots, and her complete lack of accountability, it didn't take long for the court to rule in my favor. Madison walked away with her car and a modest savings account. That was it. I, on the other hand, left with my finances intact, full ownership of the house, and most importantly, a clean break from the circus that had been my life with her. When the ruling was announced, Madison shot me a look I'll never forget, part anger, part shock, and maybe, just maybe, a flicker of regret. But by then, it didn't matter. I was done. That night, Jake and I hit the town for drinks to celebrate. To new beginnings, he said, raising his glass. To peace and quiet, I replied, clinking mine against his. And you know what? It felt amazing. The weight of Madison's chaos was finally gone, and for the first time in years, I could breathe freely. I was ready to start over, this time, on my own terms. It's been a couple of months since the court ruling, and let me tell you, freedom has never tasted so good. The house, once crammed with Madison's endless clutter, ring lights, delivery boxes stacked to the ceiling, random workout gear, was mine again. It was quiet now, peaceful, just the way I like it. At first, though, the emptiness felt strange. The extra space, both in the house and in my life, was almost unsettling. I'd spent so many years caught up in Madison's whirlwind, her drama, her ambitions, her unrelenting need for attention, that I'd forgotten what it felt like to simply be myself. But little by little, I started finding my footing again. From what I've heard, Madison hasn't exactly landed on her feet. She tried doubling down on her whole independent queen persona on Instagram, but it didn't stick. People aren't stupid. Her followers started dropping off, sponsors cut ties, and her attempt to rebrand as some kind of self-love coach went nowhere. Turns out, it's tough to sell self-love when the internet knows you as the person who blew up her own marriage. She even tried reaching out to me a couple of times. The first was a drunken voicemail where she switched between sobbing and shouting about how unfair everything was. The second was a rambling email filled with the usual Madison-isms, how she missed me, how she'd made mistakes, how we could still fix things. I didn't respond to either. Why would I? That chapter was closed for good. As for me, I decided it was time to focus on someone I'd neglected for far too long, myself. I started hitting the gym regularly, and let me tell you, lifting weights is a surprisingly effective way to burn through leftover anger. I reconnected with old friends, people I'd barely seen during the Madison years. And most importantly, I started doing the things I genuinely enjoy. Traveling was at the top of that list. For years, our vacations were little more than content factories for Madison, perfectly posed photos, wardrobe changes, and endless hours chasing the golden hour light. But my first solo trip? No cameras, no schedules, just me and the open road. It was like rediscovering a part of myself I hadn't realized I'd lost. Work has been another bright spot. Without Madison's constant distractions, I'd been able to really focus on my career. Last month, I even got a promotion. It felt like the universe was giving me a thumbs up, like it was saying, "You're on the right path, Ethan." Looking back, it's hard not to feel bitter about everything Madison put me through. She took a lot from me. She took my trust, my sense of stability, and years of my life that I'll never get back. But if there's one thing I've come to understand, it's this: holding on to anger only weighs you down. So instead of stewing over the past, I've chosen to look at it as a lesson. Here's what I've learned. Red flags exist for a reason. I ignored so many of them early on. Her constant need for attention, her obsession with appearances, the way she brushed off my feelings like they didn't matter. Never again. Trust, but verify. I'm not saying I'll be paranoid in my next relationship, but I won't be blind either. Trust isn't something you hand out freely, it's something that's earned over time. Put yourself first. For years, I let Madison take center stage in my life, putting her needs above my own, sacrificing my happiness to keep her satisfied. That's not happening again. You can't pour from an empty cup. And most importantly, life goes on. No matter how broken you feel, no matter how betrayed, there's always a way forward. You just have to be brave enough to take that first step. Every now and then, late at night, I wonder how things might have turned out if Madison had just been honest, not only with me but with herself. If she'd admitted she wasn't happy, if she told me what she truly needed, maybe we could have found a way to fix things. Or maybe not. Either way, it would have been better than the disaster she created. But you know what? I'm glad it played out the way it did. Because now, I'm free. Free to live my life without her chaos. Free to figure out who I am, without her drama looming over me. And honestly, life's pretty damn good. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Wishing you an amazing day and the best of luck.